Right now, Crimea is paralyzed. Something terrible has happened. The Russians have been hit, gasoline has disappeared, there are kilometer-long lines, panic and chaos. The occupiers are at a loss. A fuel collapse has engulfed the peninsula. People are fleeing. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are tearing Russia apart piece by piece. A fiery trap for the Russians. The enemy is fleeing from the front. This could become the most dramatic turning point of the war. Lukashenko is shocking the world. A secret weapon is already on its way to Belarus. A new threat to Europe or a devious game by the Kremlin? The consequences could be catastrophic. Poland is ready to tear Moscow apart. Patience has run out. A crushing blow from Europe. Putin is in shock. This will bring Moscow to its knees. A horrifying catastrophe in Russia. This is the end of the world's second largest army. Soldiers are fleeing on foot to their deaths. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are destroying the remaining equipment. The Kremlin is in panic. The apocalypse is already here. This is a turning point the world has never heard of before. All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. Urgent, panic and chaos in Crimea. The peninsula is in a fuel agony. There is no gasoline at all. Diesel is worth its weight in gold. Kilometer-long lines, panic and despair. This has never happened before. The occupiers are sounding the alarm, but there is no solution. Crimea is plunging into chaos. All the details in our report.
When it seems like everything is under control, reality reminds you of itself in the harshest way. Just imagine, even those in Crimea who were staunch supporters of Putin's bloody regime just yesterday are starting to panic. And it all started with gasoline.
Due to the fact that some of the plants in this case are simply physically not operating, we have encountered problems and disruptions with fuel.
The fact is, fuel disappeared from the shelves. Prices went up. Sales began to be rationed with coupons. For the residents of the peninsula, this struck at the very heart of everyday life. When the familiar rhythm collapses, so does the faith in stability. It was the severe scarcity of gasoline that truly triggered a whole wave of widespread public hysteria. A very, very long line for gasoline. Gurzuf. Oh, damn it all to hell.
So I specifically drove around the Tess and the Tan gas stations. There's no gasoline in the city. None at all. There's only diesel.
Outrage is growing on social media. Users are writing about shortages, about life becoming increasingly difficult. And what's notable is that many of them are former supporters of the authorities, loud voices in support of Moscow. Now those same voices sound different, anxious, irritated, and more often, openly disappointed.
Naturally, they're furious. Of course, they are trying to get their outrage across to the top, like, do something. You have to do something. What's the army for? What's the air defense for? You need to do something.
Officials are trying to keep the situation under control. They activate the usual pressure mechanisms, propaganda, and calming statements. But when panic is at the core, even the strongest structures collapse. In the temporarily occupied Crimea, people no longer believe the words about stability. Panic is growing, and with it, distrust toward those who promised order.
I am in direct contact with the federal authorities and all services. The situation is objective. I ask Crimeans and guests of the peninsula to be patient. The situation is forced due to objective reasons.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence has gained access to the servers of Crimean administrations. Hundreds of terabytes of data could reveal management schemes and connections in the occupied territories. This blow coincided with the fuel crisis and intensified the sense that the situation is getting out of control. And all this is happening against the backdrop of serious pressure on the Russian economy, which can no longer withstand its previous burdens.
Due to the fact that since 2022, the Russian Federation has been cut off from international markets, as of today, more than 25,000 sanctions have been imposed. The only resource the Russian Federation could count on was its internal reserves. They have been exhausted.
On an everyday level, everyone feels the crisis. Lines for food, interruptions in electricity and water, rising prices. Every little thing adds to the sense of instability. The economic downturn in Russia itself makes such forecasts even gloomier.
Today, the Russian Federation is truly in a state of stagnation. And if you take into account that, along with stagnation, it also has a rather high level of inflation, that is, the consumer price index is rising, then all of this together is called stagflation. This is a very bad thing.
In Crimea today, people are talking about a crisis that they refused to acknowledge just yesterday. It all started with gasoline, with an ordinary, everyday detail that turned out to be the trigger. It was precisely this that sparked the panic, which is now spreading ever wider. And the question is no longer when the critical point will be reached, but what will happen next once it is crossed.
At the present moment, their current financial deficit is approximately 4.5 trillion Russian rubles, a significant amount. In the budget, the annual deficit level was set at 3.8. Russia has developed a hole, and it's unclear how it will be covered. In other words, Putin will keep fighting until his population starts dying out. Literally, he doesn't care.
Defeat on all fronts at once. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are creating hell on the front line. This is Ukraine's triumph. Near Dobropilya, the Russians are trapped. The defensive line is falling apart before our eyes. The Russians are abandoning their positions and fleeing. Crimea is on fire. A new strike shatters Putin's military assets to pieces. This could become the most significant turning point in the war. All the details and footage from the front line right now. Almost 100 targets in less than 2 months. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky revealed statistics on drone strikes, the beginning of the offensive on Crimea, and the destruction of enemy electronic warfare and air defense aircraft. Dobropilya continues to bring good news. 7 settlements are once again under the Ukrainian flag, and a complete rout of the occupiers in the Sumy region. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have once again managed to advance deeper into Russian positions. Everything happening on the front today, watch it right now.
The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces gave an interview to the press the day before. As it became known, in less than 2 months, the defense forces managed to strike 85 important enemy targets, 33 of which were military. We're talking about military bases, depots, arsenals, airfields, and enemy aircraft parking areas. 52 of the targeted sites belong to the defense industry sector, enterprises producing weapons, ammunition, warheads, engines, rocket fuel, as well as drones. At the same time, analysts note that the defense forces have recently increased pressure on Crimea. So, following the destruction of amphibious aircraft, Ukrainian drones have now set their sights on transport Antonov 26 planes.
Almost every day, Russian planes or helicopters are being destroyed on the temporarily occupied peninsula. Let's recall at least 3 helicopters, 2 amphibious planes, 2 Chaika B-12S, and of course the Antonov 26. The Kacha airfield in Crimea, a military airfield. And as you can see, they fly past even the air defense systems. Why? Because in that same list, along with these Anushka planes, there are also radar stations. Before that, the sky there was, simply unique.
Our defense forces have also achieved successes directly on the front line, analysts report. In particular, the news from the Dobropilya area has once again been positive. 3 Russian units have been encircled at once, and new settlements have been liberated.
In the Dobropilya area, 7 settlements have been liberated, and according to the head of the Ukrainian General Staff, the advance into the occupied territory has reached up to 7 kilometers, with about 260 square kilometers deoccupied. The occupiers' losses amount to 2,500 personnel. It is also noteworthy that more than 20 units of heavy armored vehicles have been destroyed. A large number of Russian occupiers have also replenished the so-called exchange fund.
However, advances have also been recorded by Russian units. In particular, after failing to achieve success in strikes near Pokrovsk, the Russian General Staff decided to slightly redirect their efforts.
Unfortunately, the Novopavlivka front currently holds the dubious distinction of being where the enemy's tactical advances have, regrettably, become a constant occurrence. The problem, well, it's not even a problem, but today the enemy's tactics are obvious. The enemy tries to bypass and is bypassing populated areas, looking for weak spots in our defenses, then creating certain pockets and later attempting to close them off.
At the same time, the Pokrovsk offensive, according to the military, has weakened, especially from the north. But it can't be said that it has stopped. By transferring the remaining combat-capable units from Kharkiv and Sumy, the occupiers continue their assaults on the city from the direction of the village of Zverovoye. Even though over the past week they haven't managed to advance there by even a meter.
The Russians are not giving up on their plan to encircle Pokrovsk from the north, but there, in my opinion, our forces managed to seize the initiative. That is, whoever holds the initiative sets the terms on the battlefield.
The Kupiansk direction has also been stabilized. A recent raid towards the city, which Russian media hyped up as an incredible breakthrough by the Russian army, was quickly stopped. The Russians were deprived of the ability to secretly bring assault troops to Kupiansk and deliver ammunition. As a result, they haven't made any progress for over a week.
All statements by the Russian side about significant control of the occupying forces over Kupiansk turned out to be nothing more than an information psychological operation. The furthest the occupiers have advanced is directly on the outskirts of Kupiansk. Moreover, it should be noted that the fighting on the outskirts of Kupiansk and the creation of the so-called gray zone is an open secret. This has been going on for more than a month already. As we can see, the occupiers have had no tactical successes here.
At the same time, the Russian bravado, as if nothing is too difficult for them, has also noticeably diminished. For example, in a recent interview, the former head of Roscosmos and now commander of one of the Russian units, Dmitry Rogozin, openly stated the Russians no longer have the strength to advance.
These guys are out there in the steppe, which is completely mined, with drones buzzing from all sides, loaded down with armor, loaded down with all this stuff. And he has to have an assault rifle, and he needs ammo for that rifle, and at the same time a shotgun to shoot back at the drones. And on top of that, electronic warfare equipment, and all of this together. It's impossible to even stand up with all that, let alone get up from a chair and go on the offensive somewhere. It's extremely difficult. And if any kind of military equipment appears within 20 kilometers of the front line, it will be destroyed.
And to confirm these words, here is news from the Sumy direction. There, the Ukrainian Armed Forces managed to advance even closer to the border and liberate several settlements.
The maximum advance of Russian occupiers in the Sumy region at this point is no more than 4 kilometers. Moreover, in the recent period, Ukraine's defense forces have carried out a series of successful counterattacks, and 2 more settlements have been deoccupied. We're talking about Konstantinovka and Novokonstantinovka. Moreover, in the Sumy direction, Ukraine's defense forces have now seized the tactical initiative and accordingly are advancing deeper into the occupied areas of Ukraine.
By the way, our military also manages to operate in the neighboring Kursk region. Thus, the day before, Special Operations Forces struck warehouses there where Iskander missiles were stored, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. An Iskander launcher, 5 transport vehicles for delivering missiles, a Panzer S-1 air defense system, and warehouses with equipment were destroyed.
Urgent. A bomb has exploded. Lukashenko went through with it. Deployment of secret weapons. The unbelievable has happened. According to the dictator, deadly equipment is already on its way to Belarus. What is Minsk hiding? Is this another scare tactic from the Kremlin or a real threat to Europe? The world is in an uproar. Experts insist the consequences could be catastrophic. All the details in the report.
The Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko is once again scaring the West with Russia's hazelnut. As Kremlin propaganda blares, the Batka boasted at the Atomic Forum in Moscow about advanced weaponry deployed on the NATO border.
What kind of a joke could there truly be when we're talking about new and advanced weaponry?
It is worth noting that Lukashenko has long been negotiating with the Kremlin about deploying Putin's intermediate-range missiles on the territory of the Republic. Supposedly, the Belarusian dictator needs these missiles to deter NATO from stationing troops along his border. In reality, analysts say all this talk is just a way to raise his own value on the world stage and bargain for better terms. If not from the West, then at least from Putin.
In what sense is this more about political pressure on the West? It's like saying, look at us, we're so menacing and frightening.
But making promises doesn't mean following through. No matter how much Russian propaganda tries to embellish the words of the Batka, claiming that Putin's Hazel Grove is already being deployed in Belarus, in reality, as it turned out, the dictator said something completely different. That's how Lukashenko joked off the persistent journalists.
The Hazel Grove hasn't arrived yet?
It's already on its way. Everything will be fine.
In reality, there is no Hazel Grove in Belarus, nor can there be, experts explain. Even Putin himself may not actually have more than a few working units of this type of weapon, so there's simply nothing to transfer to Minsk. Nevertheless, the bunker dweller puts on a brave face despite the bad situation and as best he can humors Lukashenko.
Well, according to our preliminary calculations, we will set up serial production. These systems will be delivered to the strategic missile forces of Russia. And at the same time, we will begin deploying them on the territory of Belarus.
The remaining launch silos and sites from the Cold War era, originally intended for Soviet missiles, will, according to Putin, be perfect for the new Hazel Grove. As a result, there won't even be any need to rebuild anything. By saving on infrastructure, the Belarusians will be able to deploy the Russian missiles and begin combat duty just days after their arrival in the Republic.
This will also require minimal expenses. I mean that certain infrastructure capabilities from the Soviet era still remain in Belarus. Therefore, the deployment of such advanced systems within the territory of Belarus will necessitate only minimal financial expenditures for the comprehensive preparation of the necessary infrastructure.
However, the ongoing maintenance of the Russian Oreshnik will cost Lukashenko and all of Belarus a pretty penny. Some analysts believe that the country will have to work for the rest of its days almost solely to support this Oreshnik.
maintaining nuclear weapons is insanely expensive. These are very large expenses just for storage and maintenance because of its radioactive components. You constantly have to inspect its chemical parts, the detonators, the fuses, build special shelters, special services, and a whole lot more. We're talking about many, many billions of dollars.
To this, Lukashenko jokes again, saying that the Oreshnik is an advanced non-nuclear weapon, and therefore its maintenance isn't as costly.
We're being accused of deploying nuclear weapons, and so on. This is not a nuclear weapon, but it is very effective.
However, Lukashenko's actions suggest otherwise. In reality, the Belarusian dictator is in no hurry to deploy Putin's Oreshnik on his territory. In public, however, Batka continues to play the role of Putin's loyal ally. And it seems that's all the Kremlin really needs.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now. At this very moment, a sensation from Warsaw. A decision has been made. Moscow will be torn to pieces. Patience has run out. Poland has gone on the offensive, posing a deadly threat to the Russian Federation. Europe's response could be devastating. What awaits Russia now? All the details in our report.
Poland is making a move that could radically change the rules of the game in the skies over Eastern Europe.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not just the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II. It is a turning point. The old international order is collapsing before our eyes. The world has entered a new and dangerous era of great power rivalry, rule-breaking, and testing the limits of what is permissible. How far can things go before someone says a clear "enough, stop"? As we continue to talk about peace and security, we are obliged to back up these words with concrete actions.
Warsaw is preparing a law that will give its military the right to shoot down Russian drones and even aircraft over the territory of Ukraine and Belarus without prior consent from NATO or the EU. Until now, Polish military personnel have had to operate within strict limits. The 2022 law required additional approvals not only from the president and government, but also from NATO, the EU, and the country where Polish troops were to operate. This bureaucracy effectively paralyzed Warsaw's ability to respond quickly to threats. Now, however, the new coalition led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk is proposing a fundamentally different approach. Shoot first, ask questions later. The draft amendments have already been submitted by the Ministry of Defense and will not be considered under an expedited procedure.
This is a comprehensive law that will undoubtedly have a much broader and more significant range of impact than just merely shooting down drones. Just like in Ukraine, it will have a wider impact than simply moving crews to retrieve those ships that were built for us abroad at one time. We are currently standing on the very threshold of what appears to be a significant and comprehensive preparation, potentially leading to a substantial expansion in the scope of how the armed forces are utilized, extending their deployment and engagement far beyond the current operational boundaries within Ukraine.
Essentially, this is about returning the Polish army to freedom of action.
The decision-making will be delegated to the executive branch, meaning there will be no need for any parliamentary or democratic procedures. Everything will be handed over to the military. And the military, based on intelligence data, coordination with the Ukrainian side, with NATO, or with anyone else they choose, will make decisions in a closed setting that they deem appropriate from a military standpoint. In other words, the war is shifting from the public sphere of decisions made by democratic bodies to the sphere of decisions made by the military. And this clearly demonstrates that the nation of Poland is now significantly closer to a state of war than it was at any point in the past.
This step was a response not only to the increase in Russian aggression, but also to actual incidents. In September, for the first time in its history, Poland shot down Russian drones that had crossed into its airspace. Now Warsaw wants to secure the right to act preemptively. Shoot down drones even while they're still over Ukrainian territory. In recent years, Poland has been actively strengthening its eastern border. Along the borders with Russia and Belarus, construction of the fortification line known as the Eastern Shield continues. We're talking about 400 kilometers of defensive fortifications and trenches, concrete tank traps, and engineering barriers. Moscow responds to this in its usual manner. Putin calls Poland's plans utter nonsense and insists that Russia has no intention of attacking NATO. At the same time, he repeats the claim that the West is supposedly planning aggression against Russia.
Are you completely out of your minds? Who came up with this? This is nonsense, you understand? Kate?
By the way, von Kearney was saying the same thing back in 2019, 3 years before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Despite all the problems with Ukraine, the speculation around Crimea and Donbass, everyone perfectly understands that Russia is not planning to attack anyone. It's just a little bit, but...
Reality says otherwise. In order not to become yet another victim of aggression and to prevent a repeat of the Ukrainian scenario, Poland is decisively strengthening its defenses, building fortification lines, modernizing its army, and seeking the right to act preemptively in the skies. These steps are not symbolic but a pragmatic survival strategy in the face of increased Russian aggression. Poland wants to make it clear that it is ready not just to support Ukraine, but together with Ukraine to prevent any further expansion from the Kremlin.
Breaking news. An apocalypse in the Russian army? Russia has run out of tanks and soldiers are being sent to their deaths on foot. Tank crews are in a panic, surrender or flee. There is no choice as the ICU destroys the remaining armored vehicles. And the Kremlin is hiding the scale of the catastrophe. The end of the world's second army. This turns the entire war upside down and brings the complete defeat of Russia closer. All the details coming up next.
Russian tanks are on the verge of extinction. It seems the Russian military-industrial complex can't cope, and soon there will be nothing left to fight with at all. And apparently sanctions are to blame for this.
Sanctions here are more than just restrictions. They are suffering, a deterioration in the strength and quality of the products Russia manufactures, and a significant weakening in advanced technologies like artificial intelligence which Russia could have developed.
It seems that the stability of Russia's economy, as claimed by Putin, is starting to show a noticeable crack.
Sooner or later, the inevitable overheating of the military economy may not necessarily lead to its complete collapse, but rather to a very sharp and significant downturn. The general economic trends in the Russian Federation will also affect the military sectors of the economy.
It would seem that, for the first time since 2022, salaries have started to fall at Russia's most important enterprises. And yes, we're talking about companies in the military-industrial complex.
Undoubtedly, the lending to enterprises in the military-industrial complex has an impact. And the form of this lending differs from that in the non-military sector. This was an advantage at first, but now it's also working against them. Having essentially reached its peak, it's now either a plateau or a decline.
But how do staffing shortages and economic problems affect the growth of Russia's military-industrial complex?
The ability of the Russian economy to supply the army, to provide the war with equipment and ammunition. These capabilities are not limitless either, especially when it comes to rapid expansion. The modern Russian economy can reach Soviet levels, it can reach Soviet levels.
Of course, sanctions are no joke, especially when they worsen the condition and quality of your military equipment. Or maybe they even halt the production of new equipment altogether. But that's when Soviet-era tanks come to the rescue.
The focus shifted to restoring Soviet equipment. Old Soviet equipment from storage, refurbishing ammunition, and again, reworking and preparing it for combat. These resources are not limitless either.
But now the time has come when old equipment doesn't make the job easier, but rather complicates it.
There are truly fewer and fewer repairable units available, so they often have to meticulously fix what's not originally meant to be repaired, or painstakingly cobble things together from several disparate pieces. This process, unfortunately, takes significantly more effort, time, and specialized work each and every single time it is performed.
Thus, instead of producing new and modern equipment, Russia is increasingly relying on old and worn-out machinery.
The production of new equipment is hindered by sanctions, among other things, as well as the unpreparedness of the manufacturing base. That's why the pace of ramping up production of modern types of weaponry is nowhere near what Russia needs to make up for its losses on the battlefield. That is precisely why they much prefer to fund what will truly deliver tangible results right here and right now, rather than waiting for tomorrow or even the day after that.
Let's not forget about Putin's loyal friends China and Iran, who are actually helping them a great deal.
We have always been together, so we remain together now as well.
But any delivery is more a way for Beijing to keep Moscow on a short leash.
It's precisely the technological base that China is helping the Russians to pull up. At the same time, the Chinese are helping Moscow strictly from the position of a suzerain. That's why they keep their hand on the tap. If Moscow acts properly, they might open the tap.
But in the end, what do we have as of today? It is known that in 2024, the military industry of the Russian Federation reached the limit of its capabilities, but what are Russia's prospects now?
The question
is only whether the Kremlin will be able to maintain this level for long. And could it turn out that an unexpected blow will come not from the front but from within? Here's the thing.
corruption in Russia is our ally. The more the generals and the icebreakers of the Russian military-industrial complex keep stealing, the less chance they have of staying at this plateau. With each passing year, their appetites grow.
But of course, sanctions are only a small part of what can help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, an important factor is also the increase in Ukrainian production of military weapons.
That is one of the ways. Sanctions are just an alternative to weapons, but not a replacement for weapons.
A nuclear shock for the world. North Korea has developed a new ballistic missile that can reach the USA. What is Trump preparing in response? But could North Korea transfer this new weapon to Putin? But at the level of threats to the global nuclear order, all the shocking details are coming up right now.
North Korea is close to creating ballistic missiles capable of striking the USA. According to the South Korean leader, Pyongyang continues to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads and reach American cities.
It seems they haven't succeeded yet, but they are in the final stages. All that's left is the so-called re-entry technology. This will likely be resolved in the near future as well.
On the one hand, there are statements about the possibility, and on the other, Reuters, citing the president of South Korea, reports that they are entering the final stage of development, that is, only development. Whereas a year ago, South Korean intelligence reported record-breaking technical specifications and tests of the Hwasong-18. All of this creates an element of distrust toward the statements made by South Korean officials.
Last year, North Korea launched the solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile Hwasong-19, which military analysts noted bore many similarities to Russian counterparts. This launch was condemned by the US, Japan, Ukraine, Canada, and a number of other countries.
The North Korean missile program actually originates from the Russian missile program. In other words, all the developments in North Korea's missile programs, including the operational tactical complexes which are currently being supplied to meet the needs of the Russian Federation's armed forces, specifically the KN-23, as well as intercontinental ballistic missiles, can be traced back to this origin. These are the developments of Russian engineers which were subsequently implemented directly in the military-industrial complex, KKK and RSK Sangi. Last
week, it became known that Russia had transferred reactor technologies for nuclear submarines to North Korea. This move was an exchange. Pyongyang supports Moscow on the battlefield in Ukraine by sending troops and ammunition, and in return receives reactors decommissioned from Russian submarines. The new president of South Korea announced his intention to improve tense relations with Pyongyang, but North Korea rejected his offer of dialogue. Lydia Ment believes that Donald Trump may be the only person capable of becoming a negotiating partner for the DPRK.
South Korea is a strategic partner of the United States, NATO, and accordingly, such rhetoric is used by South Korea to increase funding and the capabilities of its defense industries, as well as to enhance its ability to prevent possible armed provocations from the DPRK.
In August, the US president personally announced his desire to meet with Kim Jong-un.
North Korea is in fact being used by both the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation to escalate tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, which is viewed by the United States as a key area in their foreign policy doctrine.
Earlier, the North Korean dictator stated that he saw no reason to avoid negotiations with the US, but only if Washington stopped insisting on his side's complete abandonment of nuclear weapons.
At the same time, North Korea's statements are echoed by official representatives of the Russian Federation, who have spoken about the possibility of a preemptive nuclear strike on NATO countries. Therefore, North Korea's rhetoric is an element of military political pressure by the Russian Federation's ally, primarily on South Korea, Japan, and accordingly, the potential for use against the United States as well.
North Korea is actively developing its nuclear program and missile technologies, demonstrating military might in response to international sanctions and political pressure.